Welcome to the Therapeutic Food Solutions podcast. I'm your host, Marian Mitchell. I'm an integrative nutrition health coach, therapeutic diet expert, and founder of The Road to Living Whole. There are many different diets out there. It's hard to know which one is right for you with your chronic illness and autoimmune disease. In this podcast, I'm going to share with you the foundational pieces every single therapeutic diet out there shares, and also how to use the best one for your particular diagnosis. If you've been looking for a meal planning partner, help navigating the complicated healthcare system, and want to feel better quickly, I'm your girl. Grab your kombucha and notebook. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I am thrilled for today's guest because I haven't had anybody who specializes in the topic of the day, which is long COVID and chronic fatigue syndrome. I haven't had an expert on the podcast for this, and it's a very real thing that is very frustrating that people don't get help for, and they're just basically told, get on antidepressant, get on anti-anxiety, whatever. They're just dismissed and they're just not given credence. And so they're very real syndromes with very real root causes that can be addressed. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So with me, I have Evan Hirsch, and he is going to share with us who he is, how he came to be an expert in these, and then we're going to dive into how to get to the root cause and how to recover. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on, Marian. Who am I? I first started down this fatigue journey when I met my wife in 2004. I was starting my family medicine residency, University of Washington, and I met her about a month in, and we fell in love, and 3 months later, she couldn't get out of bed.
Ah,
And that lasted for the better part of 3 years. And that was my first experience with adrenal fatigue and chronic fatigue syndrome. And I couldn't help her. I was doing my family medicine residency. I had all these experts around me, and everybody that I spoke with really didn't have much of an answer. They were like, oh, it's got to be thyroid, or, make sure that you're looking for cancer and lung issues and heart issues and like really serious stuff. And once you rule those things out, just really didn't have an answer. And I tried my best to kind of help her during that time, but I was working 80-hour weeks. Fortunately, she, actualized and kind of like was able to figure out. She treated her adrenals, she did a bunch of saunas, she worked on herself mentally and emotionally, and about 3 years later, she was 80% better. And then after that, we got married, we had a child. I started my own practice in functional medicine right after residency. And then a couple years after that, I got chronic fatigue. I basically just never really recovered from residency, it felt like. And this was around
yeah.
2010, and I graduated from residency in 2007, and my energy just started going down. I started having to nap underneath my desk every single day. And I had a lot of shame around this because I was practicing functional medicine. I was gluten-free, dairy-free, you know, um, doing everything that I thought I was supposed to be doing to be healthy. And my energy just kept getting worse. I had to keep hiring people in my practice to do the things that I needed to do. I was hiring other practitioners, hiring practice managers, and it seemed like the more people that I hired, the longer I had to spend underneath my desk napping. And I would lock my door because I felt so much embarrassment around this. I could help a lot of other people, but it seemed like I couldn't help myself. Finally, after napping what felt like the thousandth day in a row under my desk, I was like, okay, enough of this. I have to take care of this. I knew from my training that if I just found the root causes that I would be successful, and that I just hadn't been taught those yet. So I
Mhm.
had to, with functional medicine, I learned a lot about replacing deficiencies in vitamins and minerals and hormones and lifestyle habits, etc. And that was great, but I needed to go beyond that. So I went into environmental medicine, and I learned about heavy metals and chemicals and molds. I did specific trainings in infections and learned about Lyme co-infections, parasites, Epstein-Barr virus, other viruses. And then I went into nervous system dysfunction and trauma and learning about nervous system retraining. So as I went through that process and I applied those things to me, I just kept getting better and better. I wrote a book about it. And then we were uniquely positioned, and then I just started focusing on chronic fatigue and chronic fatigue syndrome. And then we were uniquely positioned to help people with long COVID because essentially it's chronic fatigue syndrome with a different trigger, being the
Yeah.
spike protein. And so that became my mission to help, 1 million of these people get their lives back.
What I love about our industry is that we have all had to help ourselves first.
Right.
And then from there, like we like take all of that knowledge that we had to learn to help ourselves, and then we're able to pay it forward. I'm sorry you guys had to go through that, but it's a very, very real thing that people get dismissed, but also very difficult to treat when you don't know how to treat what needs to be treated, right? You don't
Right.
know what you don't know. And diet's supposed to work, and IVs are supposed to work, and supplements are supposed to work. And a lot of times they do, as you and I both know, but then there's always that subset that just doesn't get all the way better, or sometimes just doesn't get better at all.
Right.
And what I find as a health coach is people feel really defeated, and they feel hopeless. One of the things that I've also found is with a diagnosis, with given a name to their set of symptoms, sometimes that becomes their identity, and moving past that is a challenge as well. So it sounds like with the nervous system dysregulation, so if you're able to address that. So I love that. Do do you have like what do you typically look for when somebody comes to you? Like, let's say this is your first time doing an intake with a patient. What are some of the first steps that somebody could expect, working with a chronic fatigue syndrome literate practitioner?
So I have a four-step process that I go through, and the first step is to figure out what causes an individual has.
Okay.
So the reality is that everyone with long COVID and chronic fatigue syndrome all have what I call the toxic five. These are the real root causes. This is a combination of the heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, the infections, and the nervous system dysfunction that has built up in our bodies over time. So a
Mhm.
lot of people out there might be thinking, well, I don't have all of those things. And the reality is that you probably do if you've gotten to the point where you have significant energy issues, autoimmunity that are kind of compromising your quality of life.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, if you take a look at the research, over 300 different chemicals are found in babies' cord blood in the placenta, through the placenta. And that was a study that was done about a decade ago. So it's probably
Mhm.
even worse now. So you have to realize that we are accumulating all of these toxins and then consequently infections over time. And then it's really just a trigger that ends up pushing us into symptoms and
Yeah.
diseases and diagnoses. So, you can have all these things in your body and then all of a sudden you move into a place that has mold and you get Hashimoto's, or autoimmune thyroid disease, or you get chronic fatigue, or you get brain fog, or you get body pain or fibromyalgia or whatever.
Right.
And so it's all of these conditions are basically the immune system's reaction to what's going on in the body. And if we look at symptoms and we work backwards, symptoms are due to inflammation,
Hmm.
and inflammation is the immune system reacting to something in the body. And so the question is, what is that immune system reacting to? And those are the real root causes or the toxic five.
So I have a question
Yeah.
because I think a lot of people are going to wonder, especially if they've been dealing with this for a while. As you know, as we've all done, we try all the things, right? And so where would a person maybe get exposed to some of these toxic chemicals? I have some ideas, but I want to hear what you think, and then I might add if we don't address it.
Yeah, so initially it's from mom through the placenta. It's a major detox process for women to have a child. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we get so much from our food, right? And our exposures. If you think about all the ways that you interact with the world, you have your food, you have your water, you have your air, and all of those have potential toxicities in them. So if you're thinking about food, non-organic food, which we didn't know a lot about, 30, 40 years ago. I'm just thinking about the 80s and how we take our food and put it in plastic containers and stick it in the microwave, right?
And
We'd
the freezer.
yeah, and right, exactly. Store things in those plastics. And then we had like the pesticides and the herbicides and the insecticides that were all on our foods and then consequently getting in our bodies.
Hmm.
Um, for me, I had chronic constipation. I had a bowel movement probably about once a week for the first 20 some odd years of my life. And so I wasn't able to get toxins out of my body. So you have to make sure you're having a bowel movement every single day, that you're consuming enough water. Most of us live in a state of chronic dehydration.
Hmm.
So, that's part of the accumulation. And then when you think about homes and water damage, about half of the buildings in the world have water damage. Most of those have mold. And so if you're then exposed to mold, that just kind of continues the accumulation. I ate a lot of tuna fish growing up, which is very high in mercury. If you have silver fillings in your mouth, those are milk mercury fillings. Every time you bite down, you're inhaling mercury vapor. So there's some heavy metals. So all of that just kind of accumulates over time. And then eventually the body kind of calls it quits when you have a certain trigger. For me, it was going through residency. It was the stress of running a practice. It was the challenges that I was having at that time in my marriage. The shame that I had because I, I, I was trying to take care of myself, but I really wasn't doing a very good job and all that. So all of that ended up being the perfect and perfect storm that led to my chronic fatigue syndrome. And that's pretty much the story that I generally hear. It doesn't happen, like that. There's a straw that breaks the
Right.
camel's back, sure, but you've been accumulating all these toxins and infections and trauma and nervous system dysfunction from day one.
Yeah. I think that in a way, I hope that people feel a little bit free because you can't always control what you're exposed to.
Right.
As we were talking about, like I grew up in the military, so on military bases, and it has come out just how horrible the homes and the barracks are maintained and the buildings and the illness that comes with that. I had severe asthma growing up, like hospitalized and stuff up until we got out of the military. It started getting better in high school when we weren't in military housing anymore. And but we used to fly a lot. And so all of those toxins and then living in a city where people are driving by and all of that.
Mhm.
And it's like, there's only so much control that we have, which I think it should give people hope, but also can make people feel hopeless.
Mhm.
Because you can't control the chemtrails, you can't control the exhaust, you can't control, how they build homes and the chemicals required to be sprayed on the wood and in the drywall and that are in paint. And I think that there's kind of this conundrum of like people feeling a financial barrier to getting healthy as well, because like you can't just build a low tox home from scratch, right? Because it's so expensive and not all of us can live out in the farm, but then the farm has their own other, challenges. And so I feel like, you know, that's going to be one thing, maybe a barrier that people will feel like, oh, I can't control that. How do you address that when somebody like feels that way? Because it's a very real thing that I hear a lot.
Absolutely, yeah. And so you have to accept the fact that there are these toxicities and not get caught up in them and think about what you can do. So part of the work that we do, we have a nervous system retraining component to our program, which is really important. And part of it is asking yourself empowering questions. So, a positive question is, what can I do about this? That's going to serve you as opposed to why is this happening to me, right? That's not an
Yeah.
empowering question, right? And
Yeah.
so, just by going with the foundations and having more awareness and making different choices for the things that you put on your body, the shampoos, etc., all those different ways that you get exposed to things throughout your day, putting a water filter on, it doesn't have to cost a ton of money. But it's drinking enough water a day, putting that filter on, for $100, $150, and so essentially we overestimate the amount we can get done in a day and we underestimate the amount we can get done in a year.
Hmm.
And so when you look at a year and say, okay, I'm going to change my environment over the next year, just do one thing every month. And now you've got AI and you can say, okay, I want you to, make a plan for me over the next year of ways to kind of detoxify all the crap out of my life. And it can kind of give you a plan. Maybe
Yeah.
1 month you're looking at all of the products that you have under the sink, right? And another one you're going gluten free, and another one you're getting an air filter or you're getting a water filter. So slow and steady wins the race. And the body really
Yeah.
does like small changes, and it doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg in order to improve the exposures that you're having. And so it really is this two-pronged approach where you get rid of the stuff that you're exposed to, and then you get rid of the stuff out of your body.
So
And
let's move
so
on to that.
yeah.
How do you get rid of the stuff in your body?
Yeah.
What are some of the methods that are accessible to people?
Yeah, let's make this really practical. So, whenever I'm taking a look at, I'm going to go back to our four-step process. So that first
Hmm.
step is figuring out the causes that people have. Whenever I'm looking at these causes, I put them into two categories. One is deficiencies. These are things that are not in the body that are supposed to be there. And the other one is toxicities. These are things that are in the body that aren't supposed to be there. Part of the deficiencies are the lifestyle habits. So once
Hmm.
again, starting with the foundations, getting 2 to 3 liters of water a day. It can do amazing things for people for their energy as well as for detoxification. Food. I know you guys talk a lot about this, but in my opinion, it's more about what you're not eating than what you are eating. So I want people avoiding gluten and dairy and sugar and alcohol and processed foods to the best of their ability. That can do amazing things for folks. And if that sounds overwhelming, just convert everything that you're eating to those things, buy alternatives. They're not always perfect, but it is a great step in the right direction, especially if you also have fatigue and autoimmunity. They can make a big difference. So there's movement. There's finding your Goldilocks dose of movement and find movement that's fun. And when I say
Hmm.
Goldilocks dose, there's a lot of people that I work with who are too tired to really move that much. And so you want to move the amount that you can without feeling worse.
So I have
And
a question about that
yeah.
because this has come up a lot with people. They ask if a sauna is a good way to mimic movement when they are too tired to do more than, 5, 7, 8, 10 minutes. Is that something that could be, is that something that social media has gotten right? That it is a way to help kind of detoxify and mimic movement in the body?
Um, A little bit. I mean, it does, and one of the main reasons why we move, I mean, there's so many benefits, but one of the main reasons is for lymph flow. The lymph system is the garbage system in the body. It does not have its own pump. It requires movement in order to move the crap through the body.
What about
Um,
the vibration plates?
right, vibration plates can definitely help. The challenge with people who've got chronic fatigue and chronic fatigue syndrome is that you want to avoid anything that's going to be stressful
Hmm.
and anything that's going to move things too quickly. So we use a lot of tinctures in our program where you're increasing by like a drop a day to kind of help move things through. But yes, you could use a vibration plate, but I would recommend, start with, a minute, every other day or something like that. Take a smaller dose than what's initially recommended. With saunas, if you're doing a far infrared sauna or even if you're just doing like a hot sauna, infections will die at higher temperatures. And so consequently, if your body is not ready to kill off an infection, then it may not be the best idea for you. I mean, saunas can also help to detoxify. They're also going to make you more dehydrated if you're not consuming enough water. The frequency in the saunas can also kill infections. They're also a little bit unpredictable, where sometimes they can cause die-off or Herxheimer reaction, other times they can't. And so, for those who aren't familiar, die-off is basically the process that happens when you're killing off an infection or removing a toxin from your body, and you feel worse because your body's not able to get it out. And
Hmm.
so, that just means that that toxin or infection is kind of getting recirculated in the body, and that's really not what we want. So, if you're going to use one of these other therapies, you have to start at just like a very low dose. A sauna for some people, it's like 5 minutes, every other day or twice a week. and then increasing by a minute every week. So you just have to go, slow and steady and find the dose that doesn't make you feel worse.
I love that you say that because, in American culture especially, we're very go big or go home.
Right.
And also, again, the social media, blessing and a curse, right? We're told, oh, studies say this amount of minutes is the ideal that's going to get you here or where you are. And, stress is, you stress resiliency and this and that. But it's like when you're in a diseased state or, a
Right.
suboptimal state, it's a very different protocol. And I see people hurting themselves and then being mad at their bodies for not doing what they were supposed to do because, they're following some recommendation off of social media versus somebody who's well versed, but also able to evaluate a patient where they're at and give them permission to do less. I find a lot of my job is just giving people permission to because they people come to me and they know things, and a lot of times, sometimes they'll meet with me and then they'll try to do it themselves, and then like a year and a half later, they come back and they're like, "All right, I can't stick with it. I need a plan." Um,
Right.
and and then we're able to actually create some solid movement, right? And I'm assuming it's probably the same way for you, or people come to you and they're like, I've tried all this or I've tried that before and it didn't work. And it's like, well, you did too much, right?
Right.
You pushed your body to a point that it couldn't. And people really don't understand the importance of detox pathways being open before adding stuff in.
Right.
Reduction is one thing, but opening detox pathways is another. But I find, again, social media and blogs and all of that can really kind of almost push it too hard for people. So when it comes to opening detox pathways, what are some of the things that are solid options? Again, with dosage, needing to be kept in mind. What are some ways that people can open detox pathways? Because when people hear this, they think green juice detoxes, they think green smoothie detoxes, they think castor oil packs. They also are going to think sauna, hot saunas, things like that. So, what are some solid ways to open detox pathways?
And yes, I'm going to get right into that. And I should say that that's step three of the four-step process
Oh, okay. So, okay, I jumped
because
ahead then.
no, it's fine because it is that important. And so many people are kind of missing that whole idea about opening up the detox pathways. So in order to get things out of your body, toxins, infections, etc., you need to have certain pathways opened. And that's going to be the liver and the kidneys and the lymph and the neurolymph or the lymphatic pathways, which is the garbage system in the brain and the gallbladder in the intestines. Like you should not be engaging in any sort of detoxification activity unless those pathways are open, because essentially what ends up happening is you just are recirculating. So
And
if
it's
you
doing more
have
damage than it was before being stored.
exactly. So
Yeah.
if you have toxins, let's say in your muscles, and you do some sort of detox and then they end up in your brain and then you have brain fog, like which problem is worse? You're just trading like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul or whatever it is.
Yeah,
So
I've had people describe it. They feel like they're playing whack-a-mole. They feel better in one area and worse than another. And then I'm like, I know exactly what's happening, right?
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Um, yeah. So yeah. And what I find again is people, then then they'll Google something and they'll just pick whatever sounds like the easiest. And then again, go big. And
Right.
then that's not the best option.
Right, exactly. And that's, coming back to like the Goldilocks dose and personalization, like you have to detoxify at a rate that the body can tolerate. If
Hmm.
you feel worse, you're going too fast.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when you're doing some of these big detox processes or whatever, like you don't know that you're going too big until, it's in the rear view mirror, so
Yeah.
we introduce one thing at a time, we ramp up by a drop at a time, like we know when you're feeling worse exactly what's happening because you're documenting your symptoms in the spreadsheet that we share all along the way. So
Yeah.
you really need that hand holding. And I think some of it also comes down to making an investment in your health. A lot of people are trying to do this on their own and they've been trying for the last 10 or 20 years when they could work with you or me and they're better in 12 months. It's like,
Probably both.
Right? Right? I mean, isn't it worth the investment of your time, your energy, and money so that you can just make that transition and you can get better and you can have the next 50 years of your life be exactly what you want it to be. But it definitely takes a mental shift around like, okay, I've got insurance. I want to be using my insurance. My partner doesn't necessarily want to pay for this. Like, we're okay going on a $15,000 vacation or buying a $40,000 car, but we're not willing to invest $10,000 over 12 months in our health. Like, there's something wrong with that. And a lot of people don't feel like they necessarily deserve to get better or
Right.
spending that money on themselves. But I can tell you from where I sit, you definitely do because as far as I know, this is the one life we get, and you might as well make the most of it, right?
How I always explain it, and this is how it was explained to me very early on, was the allopathic model and doing it ourselves. It starts out small because the copays are small and all that, but you don't get better. So then you have to go to the specialists, and then you get the MRIs and the CTs, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time. Where
Right.
with functional or integrative medicine, it's an upfront investment, but we have a terrible business model because we work ourselves out of a job.
Right.
Like we get people better, and then, depending on what type of practice you run, maybe you see them once a year for their to run their to run their labs, or they get sick and want some IVs, type of thing. But like that's really it. We work ourselves out of a job. So it is an upfront investment, which can be, people who are so used to the insurance model get really frustrated with that. I'm actually currently pregnant. I just started my third trimester, and
Congrats.
I don't go the hospital route. I did that with my first, and it was terrible. I hated it, and I was like, never again. And even with insurance, with a birth center, there's you pay, right? And everybody's just gets like, well, why would I have to pay for that? Insurance covers it. And when I first start my second born who was at a birth center, they didn't take insurance. Insurance didn't pay for birth centers. So like it was 100% out of pocket. And now over the years, insurance recognizes it, but it hasn't helped the cost at all. It's still expensive,
Right.
but and it in the allopathic model, it doesn't feel expensive until the event is over. Right. So you're paying your copays and all that, and then you get the bill at the very end and you have the sticker shock.
Right.
Right. But when my first insurance covered everything, it was a $500 start to finish thing for me back, he's going to be 18 this year. It's crazy, and so it's this thing where, you know, to get the real help, that insurance is not dictating what doctors can do, but doctors are able to do what they do and use the knowledge that they're taught. It is a cash pay system, but when it's done correctly, and from what I know about chronic disease, your method is spot on. You get to a point where you get better and you get better quickly. Now, it's not a 10-day antibiotic protocol and you feel better after 24 hours type of thing, but if you've been
Right.
dealing with chronic fatigue for, years, which a lot of people have, again, because the allopathic model fails them, you
Right.
know, then they almost can't even imagine what it would feel like to have energy. Like, and that's where I think the nervous system is such a key component. And I love that that's part of your protocol because the reframing of mind is so huge. I find a lot of people, again, don't feel like they deserve it, or they've already tried all the things, but they did them in the wrong doses or whatever, and it made it worse versus better. So they've spent $10,000 in 10 years. So the thought of spending another 10 with a targeted protocol kind of makes them nauseous. But it's
Right.
actually like, because they're like, I've also had people who go to practitioners who have a one size fits all protocol, and, so they spend 4 or 5 grand and it did nothing but make them sicker,
Right.
So that's where I find a lot of times too is people get really hesitant because they're like, well, I've already, I tried this person's protocol who promised it would help and it made it worse. And I've tried this one. So they've spent thousands and thousands of dollars. So their spouse now is like, I really don't want to spend another, you know,
Right.
like, how will we even know it works? And I find
Right.
but that's where I always tell people you can't give up, and I am like, your website makes it very clear. Like you've done such a good job on your website of just explaining what you do. And, maybe it's because I'm in it, but for me, it was like, I know that this guy knows what he's talking about. And that's why I was so excited for you today, because like that is the progress. But it took me I work with practitioners all over the country who specialize in different things. And chronic fatigue is one of those that has been people have to learn the hard way, even practitioners, on how to treat it. And so
Right.
you've already done that. And so now you specialize in it. And I really just want to emphasize that if somebody's struggling with this, I do think you're going to be the go-to person because you've lived it, you've recovered it, but your protocol is solid. So I have to throw that out there. Now I do have a question for labs for these tests. How have you found the ones that actually give you accurate results? Because I find a lot of practitioners really struggle with the labs being inconsistent.
Yeah.
And that's a frustrating thing for patient and doctor, right? So, do you have lab companies that you find to be more consistent that you prefer to use? Are you willing to talk about that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
And I just kind of want to touch a little bit on what you said, and then I'll kind of go into the
Okay.
labs. So what I've found the success formula is that you're addressing all of the causes that somebody has, and then you are personalizing their process in response to treatment with really great support along the way.
Yeah.
Okay. When you address all the causes that somebody has, they have there it is they success is inevitable, essentially.
Yeah.
So the question is, what causes do they have when all lab tests are imperfect,
Yeah.
right? So what I did is I went to the research and through my experience over the last decade, the longer that I do this work, the less I test.
Ah,
So at
yep.
this point, I treat everybody for the toxic five when they come to see me. So there are some questions about what causes they have. I'm looking at over 30 different causes. But I address the toxic five in everybody, and as a reminder, that's the heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, and nervous system dysfunction, because those are all the causes that I have found. Those are 99%
Yeah.
of all the causes. So all of the heavy metals, all of the chemicals, all the molds, all of the infections, and all the nervous system dysfunction to make sure that we leave no stone unturned because it
Right.
actually is not going to cost you more money. It's actually going to take less time, cost you less, because we're not spending $10,000 on laboratory tests to just work through a process where we're addressing all of those causes. Because I've never met anybody who has addressed all of the toxic five and hasn't resolved their symptoms. So when you
Hmm.
say, people are like, yes, I've tried everything. When I get on calls with people to see if we're a good fit to work together, I have never met anybody who has addressed everything. They may think they have,
Right.
but it's usually incomplete or that they thought they addressed everything but they really hadn't,
Hmm.
but it's been one in 1,000 people where I'm like, you know what, I think you've addressed everything and I don't have anything to offer you,
Yeah.
because inevitably people haven't. So in terms of laboratory testing, like I said, all labs are imperfect. If you're
Hmm.
looking at testing for like heavy metals, chemicals, and molds, those are traditionally done with urinary tests. Those urine tests are really more tests of excretion. They're telling you how your body is able to get rid of these toxins. So consequently, if you are not excreting well, and the sicker you are, the less well you excrete. But if you're not excreting well, excuse me, then consequently you're not going to show up with this particular toxin in your urine. And
Right.
then the practitioner is going to be like, well, you don't have mold, you don't have heavy metals, you don't have chemicals, and then you never get treated for it. And if you
Right.
have a cause that you're not treated for, you never get all the way better. So you can get
Hmm.
a lot better, but you never get all the way better. So that's the thing about the urine. If you're looking at testing for infections, those are done by either serology, which is looking at the immune system's reaction to a particular infection, or a PCR test, which is the DNA.
Hmm.
With the serology test, you're counting on the immune system being functional enough in order to give you an accurate response to the infection being in the body.
Yeah.
Now, the infection has to be in the blood in order for the immune system to have that reaction. Oftentimes, the infection is not in the blood. And then you're counting on the immune system to be functional even though you have the toxic 5 in your body, which makes it dysfunctional. So then you're
Right.
asking a dysfunctional immune system to give you an accurate response, and it just doesn't happen. And once again, if you don't show up, it's so interesting when people are like, I don't have Lyme disease, I don't have Epstein-Barr virus. How do you know? Because the lab test came back negative. How do you know that the lab test is accurate? Right?
Right.
Wouldn't you rather just like at this point, you've been sick for 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Like, wouldn't you rather just get to the finish line, treat all of these things? And and do it. So oftentimes that makes sense to folks. And then with the PCR testing, if you're checking in the urine and the infection's not in the urine, you're not going to find it. If it likes to live in the joints or it likes to live in the muscles, right? You'd have to do a biopsy of that particular area in order to find the infection, and nobody's going to do that. So that's why I found it's just better just to treat all these different causes because it saves you time, energy, and money.
Yeah, I will say that there's some practitioners I work with who rely heavy on testing, particularly like oncologists, and
Mhm.
certain doctors will do like hair mineral analysis and things like that. But what I have found is that one thing I learned from an oncologist is that they can lower the toxic burden in somebody temporarily, but as soon as they go back to living regular life, their numbers go back up. So addressing the detox pathways is almost more important, along with teaching how to constantly support the body's systems for doing the job that they're designed to do.
Mhm.
Um, so they find testing helpful in measuring metrics and things, and I think different specialties have different things, right? For oncology, I think it's a mind game with the patients, like, hey, we got the toxins out, so then they believe their body's healing, type of thing.
Uh-huh.
But then at the end of the day, they find that the numbers climb up and go back down, right? And then I work with Lyme specialty doctors, and they really specialize in those latent stealth infections, and the tests don't help with that, right? They have to address the immune dysregulation, they have to address the nervous system, and it's like you kind of see the parallels. But with chronic fatigue, again, it's a whole other beast, right? And so I think that testing, I think if particularly for people I work with, testing can be very helpful, especially food sensitivity testing, food allergy testing, things like that, so they can see how their body is reacting to things, but also we can see how leaky the gut is and things like that. But at the end of the day, you're addressing what you know, and like the numbers don't matter as much as addressing them in the first place and getting the body to be able to function optimally to take care of them when they come in. And I think that the different methods are so helpful, and I think it's so important for people to understand. But yeah, labs are, not they can't be 100% accurate because you can't if the body's not functioning optimally or typically, then things could be off. So I think I'm really glad that you addressed that.
Well, and I should say that, this was one of the things that I learned in conventional medical school that was actually correct, was this idea that any sort of diagnosis is 90 to 95% history and symptoms and 5 to 10% labs and physical exam, right?
So I wish that they would practice that way.
I know. Wouldn't that be helpful? The other thing I wanted to say is that I do some testing on deficiencies, so I do like to see, and everybody comes in, everybody that I see has already seen a functional medicine doc, a
So
naturopath,
you already have
so I
the
already
labs.
have a lot of tests that I can look at, and so I do want to see what your iron is and your thyroid and your adrenals potential. But I treat everybody, you can't have fatigue without having mitochondrial dysfunction and adrenal gland dysfunction, right? But
Right.
and there's a lot that I can tell just based off your symptoms in terms of do you have thyroid stuff? What's your vitamin D level? That can be helpful. Iron is probably the most helpful one, though iron deficiency doesn't necessarily mean that it's because I mean, that you're not absorbing it. It can be because you've got parasites. So there's a number of nuances to a lot of that. And oftentimes at the end of the protocol, we'll do testing at the end because at that point your pathways are open and it's a good opportunity to see like what's left. But generally, at the end of our protocol, at the end of about 12 months or so, when people are feeling better, their energy is like an 8, a 9, or a 10 out of 10. It's like, okay, do you want to spend $1,500 on testing? And they're like, I'm good. I don't need to see it. I feel it. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
we do provide that to them so that they can understand. And the last thing I was going to say is that, in terms of people who are treating Lyme or other infections, you can't get rid of infections if you have heavy metals, chemicals, and
right.
molds in the body. You have
Correct.
to have a somewhat intact immune system to help you get rid of those infections. You can't just beat them with antibiotics or herbs and expect them to go away.
Yeah. I always get nervous when I hear somebody say that it's like an herbal protocol without
Hmm.
addressing all the other infections. I actually see the book behind you, Toxic by Dr. Neil Nathan.
Right.
That book was like life changing for me as a health coach, working with people struggling with chronic disease. And it's one that I recommend all of the time, mostly so that they learn what questions to ask their practitioners.
Hmm.
He does a really good job of laying out how to address, what's expected to address without giving away everything, because there's a lot of things that people just won't be able to do there on their own,
Right.
as lay people. And I think that especially I have found that people will try to do it themselves to save money, but at the end of the day, they spend more instead of
Right.
just getting the help that they need. So, and the other thing that I found, and again, this comes with working with people who don't necessarily specialize in the symptom set that somebody's experiencing, is they'll work with somebody and they'll get this much better, and then they kind of keep going and then they get tired of feeling that way. And then they find another practitioner and they get a little bit better, but they never get all of the way there because they don't address all of them. A lot of practitioners like to just, test and then treat that instead of
Right.
addressing everything. And I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of people struggle with multiple infections, especially if you're dealing with chronic disease, like chronic symptoms, chronic fatigue, all of that. Like, there's no one magic bullet ever.
Right.
It is a whole lifestyle overhaul and addressing deficiencies and blockages and all of that. So I really, I really love what you're doing and your approach to things.
Thank you. And it sounds overwhelming to be like, okay, we're going to address all these things, but when you're introducing one supplement at a time and you're ramping up by a drop at a time and you've got me in your back pocket with a guaranteed response in 2 business days, like it's very manageable. You reach out, you let
Yeah,
us know if you're feeling worse, we let you know what to do, you pivot, like you're gonna pivot like 50 times going through our process over the next 12 months, and you just need to know what to do and have access to somebody who kind of knows what they're doing. And I just want to speak to that question or that point about specialization. Like if you want to learn how to play piano, you get a piano teacher.
hmm,
If you have a problem with your car, you go to the mechanic, right? You're not going to ask your mechanic to teach you how to play piano. And that's essentially what you're doing if you're not seeing a specialist. So if you have
yeah,
irritable bowel syndrome or IBD, or if you have cancer or whatever you have, like go see somebody who specializes in that, right? So
right,
that's all they do. Long COVID and chronic fatigue is all I do all day long for the last decade. I know a lot of nuances and I've, refined my work based on those people that I see who just have your condition. So it's very
yeah,
different than just going to see a regular functional medicine doctor. When I was practicing just functional medicine, there was no reason for me to learn heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, and nervous system dysfunction. I could get 95% of people better just by doing step 2 in my process, which is replacing deficiencies,
yeah,
optimizing hormones and vitamins and minerals and lifestyle habits, etc. Right? So I was forced. Nobody really wants to learn these things. I was forced to learn these things because I was sick, right?
hmm,
And consequently, I mean, it's like you said initially, it's kind of like it's, from my mess to my message, like there's a reason, like this is a spiritual path if you let it be that, and for me, it was, I had to go through this in order to be able to help other people.
yeah. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel too with all of my health problems. Like I come from this place of I've been there and I've come out the other side. And so there is hope. And,
Mhm.
I also know that I help with nutrition and basic lifestyle, but I also know that I'm not a practitioner. I'm not a doctor, and I love being able to have resources to refer people to, that are well versed and that they feel like they have a good fit and somebody who hears them. It sounds like you do what a health coach does with the doctor practice mixed in, which I think is just phenomenal because a lot of practitioners that I work with don't have the time to do the hand holding that I have the time to do and I want to do with them, with the questions, hey, they're at the grocery store and they're sending me text messages with screenshots. Is this safe for me to eat? And, does this fit in, with everything? And more of it is just telling them what they already know, but they have somebody to kind of back them up. And then when they start, they initially feel really good. And then, they start kind of, because healing is a journey of ups and downs, and it's not the straight line of just feeling better every day.
Right.
Just to be there to support and let them know that they're doing things right, or hey, you probably should take a step back, or reach out to your doctor and let them know because
Right.
they might want to build in a binder or cut back or, something like that. Just that ongoing support and being able to ask permission, be told they're doing it right, that they're doing a good job, that, that they are learning how, like, okay, like, maybe 6 months in, they realize, okay, I'm starting to have a little bit of a Herx or something, but they know what to do by that point, right? So then they just let you know,
Right.
hey, this happened and this is how I took care of it and I feel better, right? Just for like documentation. And,
Right.
and then when they have a bad day, you can remind them, hey, like 5 weeks ago you did this and remember? And then like that mindset of, oh, okay, it's not coming back. It's just part of the process. Because a
Right.
lot of times it feels like one step forward, two steps back in the healing
Right.
journey when it's really two steps forward and then you need to pause. It's not a step
Right.
back, it's just the body has to catch up to what's happening, right? Like if the body gets to a point where it can release a whole bunch of toxins into the blood, you're going to feel like crap for,
Right.
a few days. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, now I know I need to rest. I need to up my water. Maybe I need to take this tincture or, a binder or, whatever. And to not be alone and say, hey, I'll see you in a month or I'll see you in three
Right.
months. Like, especially with something like chronic fatigue, where it's so much more of a mind game as well as like a physical disability almost.
Right.
And I love that you practice that way, especially for chronic fatigue, because they have been told not to trust themselves, that it's all in their head for so long,
Right.
to have somebody who will believe them and validate them and guide them on a two business day reply at the longest. Like that's just huge for people. That's phenomenal. What a wonderful way to practice.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely flipped my practice and how I do things based on what I saw that people needed. And I do practice online only as a health coach so that I can practice across state and national lines.
Awesome. I was
Um,
going to ask about that.
yeah, and when I realized that I didn't need to prescribe anymore, it was kind of like a no-brainer, you
Yeah.
know. But what I figured out was that people really need an initial plan from me, and then they need that help along the way. I get so much data from their response to treatment. When we
Yeah.
give them something to kind of start pulling out heavy metals and chemicals and you feel worse, like that's more diagnostic for you having those toxins in your body than getting any urine test. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's navigating all those things so that they can continue to move through the process at a rate that their body can tolerate, have the support that they need in their back pocket, have the one-on-ones, have the group calls, so we've kind of provided all that support so that we're there
Yeah.
for them when they need it.
That's phenomenal.
Mm.
And it's so great to have the flexibility to be able to practice that way. Like, that's just huge. I'm so thrilled to have connected with you. I cannot wait for this episode to go live and for people to have you as a resource. So, even though this will be in the show notes, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, like right now, they're on their phone, ready, how do they reach out to you? How do they get in contact with you?
So go to myfatiguescore.com. That's myfatiguescore.com. That is going to take you to a short fatigue assessment to see how fixable your fatigue is. will give you a percent, how fixable it is. And then you can go and watch my latest masterclass and learn more about my philosophy of care. And then if you want to see if we're a good fit together, you can hop on a call with me for 45 to 60 minutes where I'll go through another assessment to determine whether or not I feel like I can help you. About 30% of the time, I tell people that I don't think we're a good fit for whatever reason. So it's not foregone conclusion. I do want to make sure that I'm only taking people into the program who I feel like I can help, right?
Yeah.
So that would be the normal process for folks. But starting off with myfatiguescore.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for your time and what you're doing. I am so thrilled to have had this conversation to give people hope. Like there is a way out of it. It's not all in your head. It's not
Right.
crazy. It's fixable. So I'm thrilled. So thank you so much for your time. And I look forward
Yeah.
to, seeing where you go from here. It's going to be awesome.
Thank you. And for people who really want hope, go check out our testimonial page. We've got almost 100 testimonials on there, and it feels really good to kind of go through and watch some of those, and you'll see yourself and see the transformations that people have had, and it'll give you hope that you can do the same. Thanks so much for having me on,
Awesome.
Marian.
Thank you. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you found this episode helpful, would you do me a favor and help others find it by leaving a review, sharing a screenshot on social media, or sharing the link with a friend? By you sharing what you've learned, others are able to find this podcast and join our community. Be sure to check out my website, www.roadtolivingwhole.com, for over 160 delicious recipes, a variety of meal plans, and a blog packed full of even more healthy living tips. If you'd like to learn more about how to work with me as your coach, you can schedule a free consult through www.roadtolivingwhole.com/health-coaching/. Until next time, friend. Bye.